Relationships are hard, am I right? Well, they get a whole lot easier if we understand our attachment styles, and those are the ones we love. And so I'm excited to bring to you in the live Q&A Thais Gibson, who is an expert on attachment styles and the subconscious and how we can leverage them for better relationships. And to get us off to a good start here, I'm going to give you a little introduction and background to our guest. Her name is Thais Gibson. She is a dynamic best-selling author, keynote speaker, and leader in the personal development field. Her groundbreaking research on the subconscious mind and personal transformation has been recognized by major social media outlets such as Time Business News, The New York Post, and Yahoo News. Thais, her eloquent public speaking has also left a positive mark on audiences globally, and she was invited to be a speaker for the Google International Women's Day in 2022. She's also been on many podcasts to share her expertise. She is the founder of the Gibson Integrated Attachment Theory, a dynamic theory that empowers individuals to heal different attachments in their lives and reprogram any limiting thoughts and behaviors. Her teachings have been distilled into in-depth courses inside of the Personal Development School, which offers 60-plus courses that feature step-by-step instructions for changing negative patterns. These courses have had over 1 million downloads across 113 countries. She's also certified in 13 different psychological disciplines and has drawn from this knowledge to create her integrated attachment theory. She's also the author of her book, Attachment Theory, A Guide to Strengthening the Relationships in Your Life. And so without further ado, let's meet Thais. Hey, welcome, Thais, to the MHT Live show. Great to have you on. Thank you for making time to share your words of wisdom.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and appreciate you having me.
My pleasure. So excited to dive in. Attachment theory is a hot topic when it comes to personal development, and anyone who has been on your YouTube channel or socials will just find a plethora of information there. It's just I'm dumbfounded by the amount of content, quality content that you're able to crank out. That is just loaded with actionable information and tips for those who find you. So I'll be sure to share a little bit of that and where everyone can find you toward the end here, and definitely stick around to the end for that. So maybe you could share a little bit about your background. I know I just gave a lengthy little bio, but bios don't do you justice. It's just a piece of paper that I'm reading from and not your lived experience. So maybe you could share a little bit about what got you into this space, what's caused you to really lean into it, and what's next for you.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I definitely got here from personal sort of experience with a lot of things. I definitely had a bit of a chaotic upbringing at times. Definitely saw a really, really rough divorce go through my home and different things like that. And I myself was a fearful avoidant attachment style, which is the one that sometimes people refer to as disorganized attachment style as well. And, to be completely honest, and I share this quite frequently, is I sort of had an outlet, which was sports. So I got a soccer scholarship to a D1 school and all this kind of stuff. But just before my scouting year, I had surgery and on my knee and ended up getting addicted to painkillers and went through this sort of like 6 or 7 year bout of like really, really struggling with that. And trying a lot of different things that weren't working for me personally. So AA, NA, rehab, all those different things. And I was fairly high functioning. Like I would go to rehab in the summers and then come back and things like that. Like I stayed in school for that period of time, and I was in a psychology class one day and somebody said to me like, oh, your conscious mind can't outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. And that to me, like as somebody who was prior to that whole experience, like a very high achieving kind of person and like cared about my grades and cared about, doing good in the world and all these different things. When I went through that period of addiction, like it really was tormenting. And I think one of the biggest parts was because every day I would be like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to avoid this person in the hallway that I get these from, or I'm going to, I would do all these things, delete people's numbers from my phone, come up with all these kinds of like strategies to kick this, and then go back to the same patterns of behavior. And if anybody's ever experienced that, who's listening, like it's a pretty soul-sucking experience to hear yourself over and over again be like, I'm going to stop doing something. This is the end. And every day you just go back to repeating the same patterns.
Wow, what a great way to say it. Yeah, it is soul-sucking, right? But we all have our thorn in the flesh, We all have that thing we wish we could just put behind us, right?
Absolutely. And so hearing somebody say the conscious mind can't outwill or overpower the subconscious mind was like, oh, this is what my experience is. Like it made everything make sense in that one moment. And, I had made all these pieces of meaning out of that situation. Like I'm just weak. I'm not strong enough to kick the habit. Something's wrong with me. I'm just not a good enough person to be able to get on the right track again in life. Like we give all these meaning to things. And when somebody said that, I was like, oh, this is what's actually happening. Like my conscious mind is intending to stop this whole pattern, and my subconscious mind has different intentions. And so when I understood that, it made me like become very, very hungry for wanting to understand the subconscious mind, because I realized that like if I was going to change this, it was going to change there. It wasn't going to be because my conscious mind was like deleting phone numbers and avoiding people in the hallway, or that wasn't going to be the answer. And so I got really sort of obsessed in a way with understanding the subconscious mind, and went down like a lot of that path for quite some time. Got certified in hypnosis, like all these different, NLP, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But I didn't like that was very much for my journey. And later on in when I ran a client practice, I didn't like the idea of hypnotizing people too much. I really wanted to like help people understand the inner workings of their own subconscious mind. So my sort of journey then went into like unpacking, my own pain, my own suffering, what that was about, and realizing at the root, a lot of it actually had to do with relationships and what was modeled to me in different like challenges and pain points, and having to go back in there and unpack and work through those things, but particularly at a subconscious level, was extremely, extremely healing for me. And so that sort of kicked off a journey where I started just speaking to people for free, just giving free workshops at a quite young age at the time, because I was like, I got sober through this when nothing else had worked for me. And it made me understand, like I was going down this path because I was trying to solve pain, right? I was using painkillers to numb pain, but a lot of that pain was actually psychological and emotional, that when I went in there and worked through a lot of different things, was really, really profound for me. So I came up with, a whole bunch of really, simplified tools, distilled tools to help reprogram the subconscious mind and the different meaning that we give to painful events and challenges that we essentially carry with us. And then got really into like how that is very much rooted in our attachment style and relationships from a young age.
Wow. So that's quite the journey. But how did you? What did the work look like in addressing your subconscious? Because I know you're summarizing many years of deep work, right, into a snapshot. But what did that work actually look like? How does one go about learning about their own subconscious? What influences it?
Yeah.
How do we start that deep work that you did in order to work on your recovery?
It's a great question. So there's many different sort of branches, I would say, but I would say the top two that were most impactful for me, maybe the top three. Actually, I'm going to give you four because it's an
Great.
injustice.
More the better.
um, but I would say one of the first things that was really profound for me, like the actual first sort of path I went down, was understanding that through different traumatic instances, we give meaning to things. And because the subconscious mind is essentially survival wired, it seeks certainty. So what the subconscious mind does is when we go through traumatic events, we give it meaning. So, as a child, for example, when I saw a lot of chaos in my home, I made that mean I am unsafe, I can't trust. And because our subconscious essentially creates the lens that we see the world through, like it's important for anybody who's not aware of this, that we understand that our subconscious and unconscious collectively are actually responsible for 95 to 97% of our beliefs, our thoughts, our emotions, our actions and decisions, whereas our conscious mind is 3 to 5%. And so,
That's
for
just mind
me,
blowing.
yeah, right. And like we should be
We like
talking
to
about
we like to think that we're in control, right? That we're making educated decisions, but we're just kind of on
exactly.
autopilot, right?
Exactly. And so for me, it was understanding that through different painful events, I had made a lot of meaning, and the subconscious mind personalizes things. So I had all this meaning floating around in my mind that I essentially got imprinted with at a subconscious level. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm bad. I can't trust. I am unsafe. All these sorts of pieces of meaning. And what happens is these pieces of meaning become our core beliefs about ourselves. And so whenever we go through a painful instance or event, we give that meaning and it gets stored subconsciously. And then that becomes that lens you see the world through. And our belief patterns create thought patterns, right? So if I believe I'm not good enough, for example, I may have a lot of thoughts circulating throughout the day, like, I'm not interesting enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not, fill in the blanks for all the different things that people will make those things mean. And then when we're thinking those things, how do we feel, right? We feel sad, we feel defeated, so our belief patterns are leading to thought patterns and emotional output, which then is made up of neurochemical reactions, right?
Mm.
So you can see how that actually affects your neurochemistry. And then neuroscience, a neuroscientist by the name of Antonio Damasio actually proved that every single decision we make is based on our emotional state. And so you can sort of, I think of like our beliefs as being our tree trunk, and then the tree branches being the thought patterns that follow,
Mm.
the leaves being the emotions, and then our decisions follow that as well. And so one of the first things I started doing when I was trying to explore my subconscious mind was trying to be aware of my thoughts throughout the day, realizing that they stem from these different beliefs that were unprocessed. And I remember one of the first things I did is I sat trying to sit in meditation and self-observe. And I was like, I had this sort of shocking moment, like this revelation of going, oh, no wonder I avoid myself all day. No wonder I numb myself all day, because I sat down and I was like, I can't do this stuff. I'm not smart enough to do this stuff. I'll never figure this out. I'll never get my life back on track. And I sat with myself. And when I started observing my thoughts, I was like, oh, my whole internal dialogue is absolutely a mess. It's constantly putting myself down. And no wonder I want to numb, because I'm trying to numb this internal world that I'm dealing with all the time. And a lot of the different things I was exposed to in childhood, had an impact on that internal dialogue. I often think that our internal dialogue becomes the internalized dialogue from our environments, like what kind of dialogue we get from people around us. And so, I had some dynamics where there was, different individuals being really tough on me. And so I was so tough on myself. And so the subconscious gets programmed through repetition and emotion. And we have to understand that we are, the input we're exposed to, we really soak up and sponge up. So one of the first things was understanding how to reprogram my thought patterns and belief patterns. And that was mind-blowingly effective for me. Like, that just really made me feel like I could be sober with myself. I think I was constantly escaping myself because I was escaping that. And then I'll make the other ones a little shorter, but the other things were, I find that so the other thing that creates an emotional output besides our belief and thought patterns, right, are unmet needs. So if we look at our lives, we have basic needs as individuals. And when those needs are unmet, we feel bad feelings. And that's technically working for us, right? Like if I were to move, for example, to a new country all alone and not know anybody, I would probably have an unmet need for connection. And I maybe would feel sad, like, oh, I want to be around people. And that would help me to adapt, right? That pain helps us adapt. It's a feedback mechanism. But what happens is when we don't understand what our needs are and we don't realize that they're unmet, then we have these chronic, painful emotional outputs from unmet needs, which of course also, those emotions are made of neurochemical reactions and also affect our mental state and our psychological state and our neurochemistry. And so, what I realized as well is that there were certain needs that I was really missing from childhood. And when we look at the way that we attach, like, the different needs to feel a sense of safety or presence or connection, or, I could go on about many different needs, but when I started understanding that healing is also introspecting and seeing what wasn't given to us as children and how we can become the individuals that meet that in the relationship to ourselves, I realized, like, okay, it sounds funny, but it sounds cliche, but it's like when we become our own parents, that's very healing. And it's also very individuating, right? Like we get that sense of like deeper, inner, more sustained sense of self. So doing a lot of work on meeting my unmet needs from childhood was very healing for me, very profound. And then I would say a next big branch of it was nervous system regulation. So realizing that, if you come out of sort of a traumatic family environment, then you're constantly upregulated, right? You're much more in sympathetic or fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode than rest and digest mode. And learning to re-regulate my nervous system through simple activities like meditation, mindfulness practices help me feel more rested and also more present in my life and help me feel safe in my body again. And then I would say the very last thing was doing a good bit of shadow work was very beneficial for me at a subconscious level. So really understanding that when we go through these different sort of branches of healing, that a lot of them, like, they can't just be an understanding or an awareness. They have to be an application of tools, because it's through repetition and emotion that we rewire our neural pathways. So sort of digging into those four major branches was definitely super helpful for me.
Wow, that was just a water hose of gold right there. No, I mean, thank you, because you just touched on so many core concepts that I think are sometimes watered down. Like we talk about shadow work, but I mean, it's kind of a catch term now, but what does that actually mean? Shadow work. And you were talking about re-regulating our nervous system. Like we know that as biofeedback, but biofeedback is another term that's been thrown around as kind of like, oh, get some bio. But I mean, I talk to clients all the time. They don't know what biofeedback is. And so it's that rewiring. And I think there's such a lack of knowledge and understanding about these core concepts that are crucial to, as you say, learning to reprogram our mind, right? And we talk about, you bring up topics like the subconscious, and some people think like you're going into woo-woo land, right? But it's not. It's scientific, and from what I've read and the way I understand it, is that the subconscious will, anything that we allow into our subconscious will find a way to express those needs, as you say, those unmet needs. And so that's oftentimes in our behavior, our emotions, right? Our nervous system. And it's kind of, we're kind of at the mercy of it, right? Unless we're paying attention.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's so interesting is when it comes to needs, is like our subconscious mind will always find a way to meet its needs. But when we don't have conscious and healthy strategies, a lot of those ways are ways that we created patterns from childhood. So things get patterned into us through repetition plus emotion. I think it's important for anyone listening to also realize that our subconscious speaks through emotion and imagery. It doesn't speak through language so much. So if I say to you, for example, like, please, whatever you do not think of the pink elephant. Like, what happens? Like, your subconscious actually flashes an image of the pink elephant.
Yes.
And so our subconscious doesn't really hear these like knots, and it doesn't really speak language. It speaks in emotion and imagery. So when we're trying to rewire things, we have to actually speak in the language. We're really trying to leverage repetition, emotion, and imagery. So let's say, for example, that one of the things you're trying to rewire is this idea, just for simplicity's sake, that I'm not good enough, right? Really common belief a lot of people acquire from childhood. And so if we're trying to change that, like, I'm not a big believer in affirmations, because affirmations is speaking conscious mind language. It's I am good enough. I am good enough. So what we actually have to do to fire and wire new neural pathways, for example, when trying to reprogram core beliefs, is we have to take I am not good enough, and we have to say, what's the opposite? I am good enough. And then we have to find pieces of evidence. And evidence, if you look, is actually in memory, right? So I'm good enough because I went to this school, I obtained this certification, or I graduated from this program. And when you think of pieces of evidence, they're actually pieces of emotion and imagery. And so there's one really simple tool. I mean, there's many tools to reprogram your subconscious, but one really simple tool for rewiring your beliefs and your internal dialogue is a form of auto-suggestion. And the idea is that we pick states of mind where we are suggestible, meaning that our brain is producing more alpha or theta brainwaves, which typically happens first hour of the morning, last hour before you go to bed, or after like a meditation or something like that. And when we're in this like more suggestible state, we want to come up with 10 pieces of evidence across 21 days as a habit for why we are the opposite of this painful belief we're carrying. So for myself, I did a lot of that on I am worthy, I am good enough, I am able to trust, I am safe, all these old ideas that I was carrying from childhood. And over 21 days, okay, I am safe because coming up with 10 pieces of evidence. I have locks on my door. I live in a safe place. I'm getting better at, setting boundaries. I have people I can count on or rely on in my life. And so when we do that and we picture those things, those issues, those painful limiting beliefs and challenges, they're not conscious mind problems. Those are subconscious mind problems. So we have to fix them with subconscious mind solutions. And so doing something like that across the 21 days with repetition, emotion, and imagery allows us to actually rewire those entire paradigms of otherwise kind of trapped thoughts and belief patterns that can really affect us emotionally.
Thank you for that. Thanks. That is like gold, right? Because and it sounds very CBT, right? And we think about cognitive behavior. I know you have certifications in that. If we're talking about like core beliefs, right? Yes. Core beliefs. I love that imagery you gave of the tree being the core beliefs, and you have these other things kind of branching off, right? The thoughts and our feelings and everything are kind of rooted in those core beliefs. But it's hard, to change our core beliefs. And so when I'm working with clients, oftentimes when we talk about positive affirmations, and one of the biggest challenges is they feel inauthentic.
Yeah.
Right? If they're inauthentic, our brain is going to like,
Exactly.
Sorry.
And then you have the negative emotion that you're trying to get away from because you're actually moving towards the painful belief instead of it. That's why evidence is the system hack for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the brain is very good about debating, right? About playing the devil's advocate and be like, no, but what about A, B, C, and D? All of these negative things we tend to ruminate on, our past regrets, the things that lead to self-shame, right? That negative self-image.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
subconscious is very, if we have those rooted core beliefs that are negative or skewed about ourselves, like you said, because of the way we were raised or the things we were exposed to or those lived experiences that form those core beliefs, then our subconscious is very good about protecting them, right? Because they're so closely attached to our identity.
Exactly. And because the subconscious is always trying to maintain its comfort zone, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
it's always trying to maintain its space of familiarity. And so we can have that resistance, but that's so to be perfectly honest, like just to break it down, it's CBT for the subconscious mind, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
CBT,
Right.
well, that's what this is, right? Is
Yes. Absolutely.
understanding principles of how the subconscious reprograms. And all I did was take CBT information and different dynamics and then be like, okay, well, how do you not keep it conscious? How does it not just stay in affirmations and language? How do we speak
Mm-hmm.
in the language of the subconscious and leverage that across about 21 days we can really, if we divest essentially from this same sort of storyline of how we're not good enough or not, not a good person or not safe or whatever it is, if we divest from that and we really feed evidence and repetition, emotion, imagery to the other side of it across 21 days, we actually reprogram that core belief at the subconscious level rather than just having the conscious mind kind of awareness.
See, I was hoping I could just play a tape while I sleep,
I know
because
it would be nice if we
everything else sounds like work.
I really think that we have to put that effort in. Like it's, there's certain things that can relax your subconscious or you can, binaural beats or different interesting things, but ultimately like we're essentially using our conscious mind to speak to our subconscious and really shift those painful belief systems where they're at.
Yeah, wow. So the subconscious is a huge pinnacle point in terms of personal development, sounds like. Once we understand the work that needs to be done with the subconscious, then we can start to get a foothold on change, right? We start to speak in our brain's language,
Yes, exactly.
right?
And exactly that. And also the subconscious mind is so like it's like a giant warehouse. Like the way memory gets encoded, it stores all the different memories that we have. It consolidates them a little bit over time, but it's storing all that information there. And so when we go through and we're trying to, change our lives, if we don't change our inner world first, then it's really hard for our outer world to change. So we really have to engage the subconscious mind in the process across a number of different things in order to actually see those results that we're looking for.
Yeah, and you touched on something earlier on that I don't want to just drive past, and that is you said meaningful experiences, good, bad, or otherwise, are things that get locked in, right, to
Yeah,
our subconscious. And
exactly.
things that are meaningful reminds me of that quote, we remember moments,
Yes.
right? Those are the
Yes.
things that stick with us. We may not remember what somebody said, but we remember how they made us feel, right?
Yes.
Those
Exactly.
cliche those quotes are popular for a reason, right? They resonate with us, right?
Absolutely. And we can really leverage that. Like if you ever look at how the subconscious mind works across traumatic instances, one really good example is like, and God forbid, but let's say Bob gets in a car accident. Okay. Bob may feel completely safe driving his car prior to the accident, and he has one painful experience. And the next day, he's scared to get back in his car. And it's because the subconscious repetition is important for reprogramming, but ultimately emotion is the most important ingredient.
Hmm.
So when we have a really intense emotional experience, it can leave an immediate imprint, right? So Bob may have this core belief that develops exactly from that one experience of a car accident the very next day because the emotional state was so heightened. So emotion lives with us. Emotion's a huge, component of how we actually encode memory and convert memory from short-term memory to long-term memory. But also emotion is the secret and the most important ingredient when we want to reprogram something or change it.
Wow, that is gold. And so it's kind of understanding the different levers we can pull with this change. It's important to understand how they develop, right? We know about trauma, and trauma lives in the nervous system, and emotionally charged moments tend to be the things that stick with us. But much to your example, it's not enough to just do the surface level work. We have to address the emotion too, right? And if we combine the cognitive in terms of remembering the evidence, the things that combat our negative assumptions, making sure our thoughts are accurate, balanced, complete. That completeness is the evidence, right? It's playing detective and challenging our negative thoughts, looking for the exception, right? The exceptions, and the chances are that those things are being neglected when
Yes.
we have those intrusive thoughts of worry, those intrusive thoughts of self-doubt, right? And so getting in the habit of reflecting on the evidence. And so it's probably really important to journal those things, I imagine.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And to have something where, like, on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
you have something that you're reprogramming in the morning. So, or the evening, like that habit across the 21 days helps to really unwind that core idea. So, absolutely that. And the same principles apply to different aspects of ourselves, right? It applies to, like, do we do that work to consistently meet our own unmet needs, right? Do we do that
Hmm.
work to create new habits to foster the sense of self-care if we didn't have a lot of self-care in different ways in childhood? So it sort of applies across all these different forms, but the emotional part is absolutely key.
Yeah. Yeah. So the subconscious is a hot topic, right? In terms of personal development. But I'm wondering, is there a relationship between our attachment styles and our subconscious? Are they related?
Yes.
Because I know
So
that's like a main vein for you too, and I'm wondering there must be a connection, since these
yes.
are two of the things you've really drilled deeply in, right?
Yeah. So when I first started working with clients, I started working with clients and seeing way too many clients per week. I had to work on my boundaries early on there too. But I would see like 35 or so people a week. And I first started working with people on a few core things. So when people come in, we'd recondition their different belief patterns, right? These old core
Mm-hmm.
wounds. We do that auto suggestion work, use other reprogramming tools. That's one of, about 20 or so major tools that are out there that are solid. And then we would work on them understanding their unmet needs, learning to actually meet those needs in the relationship to self, essentially almost like reparenting using their conscious mind to understand what needs were missing from childhood, to give those needs in the relationship to self. And then we would do the nervous system work for emotional regulation purposes, right? So we started there. And then, I would then get people to go and communicate those needs to other people, right? Because now that I know my needs, I have to get them met by other people. And I would also work with clients on reestablishing their boundaries. And so, funnily enough, as this theme kept coming up with people's relationships, and I kept ending up, working with people on their relationship dynamics. And I was always working with people in these major categories first: the core wounds, the needs, the emotional regulation, the actual boundary work, the communication, and then also upgrading old coping mechanisms, right? The behaviors. Because what we'll see is, like, there's no actual such thing in our lives, in my opinion, as like self sabotage.
Hmm.
What we experience as self sabotage or procrastination is actually our conscious mind intending something and our subconscious mind having a different set of needs, right? Our conscious mind can say, I'm going to sit down and finish the paper. And our subconscious mind can say, yeah, but you have unmet needs for social connection today. So while you try to sit down there, I'm going to keep diverting your attention to scroll through
Hmm.
social media and see what people are doing, right? So we have this, like, friction between our conscious and subconscious, and that's actually what procrastination or self-sabotage are. But
Ah.
anyways, to stay
Okay.
on track, so we have these 6 major areas. And then when I started digging more into attachment theory, and of course, like, learned all about attachment theory, like, first year university, but it was such
Mm-hmm.
a high level, like, it was not very, very in depth. And then going back and working through some of those things, what I found that was so wild to me is how these different attachment styles had these exact same patterns, like 95% of the time, with similar core wounds,
Hmm.
similar unmet needs from childhood, similar emotional patterns they struggled with, similar boundary issues, communication issues, and coping mechanisms.
Ah.
And so what I found is that when I was working with people on these different subconscious dynamics, that actually what could happen is when I would start understanding somebody's attachment style, I knew, like, okay, if they're anxious, preoccupied, their wounds, their core wounds are going to be around a fear of abandonment, being alone, being excluded, being not good enough, being unlovable, being unsafe when somebody pulls away from them, right? They have this panic sort of nervous system dynamic. And I knew that their unmet needs from childhood were going to be around that consistency, that safety, that connection that was reliable. And so and we can go on, but there was certain core wounds, certain unmet needs, certain emotions they would feel, like anxious preoccupieds will feel a sense of being panicked or afraid, or a sense of sadness, loneliness. And you'll see that's very different from a dismissive attachment style in terms of the core wounds, the needs, the emotional patterns. anxious preoccupied struggle all the time with their boundaries. They're boundaryless. They're big people pleasers. They tend to have no relationship to being able to communicate their needs to others. They communicate in the negative. So they'll say, "You never do this," instead of, "Hey, I really could use some support. Can you do this?" Right? They communicate reactively rather than proactively. And their behavioral coping mechanisms are activating strategies to try to maintain proximity, to call a lot, text a lot, cling. And so, interestingly enough, what I found is these 6 major things I would work with clients on before even looking at attachment theory or anything related, they actually boil down to these 6 major areas. And one of the things that I thought was kind of missing from an attachment theory perspective was there was a lot of beautiful discussion around it and a lot of like understanding of temperament and patterns, but there weren't tools for how do you change it? How do you reprogram it? How do you heal it? And so what I started working with people on specifically was actually learning to recondition their attachment style by reconditioning core wounds, meeting their unmet needs, emotionally regulating through that nervous system work, and then digging into better boundaries, better communication, and a change in coping mechanisms. And all of those things can be reprogrammed at the subconscious level to create new patterns. And those are exactly the 6 things that we need to change in order to become securely attached. And so that's where integrated attachment theory came from.
Wow. That's great. It's great to understand that the common thread between negative core beliefs, right, in our subconscious are so closely tied to our attachment style through the unmet needs,
Yes.
right? And that our attachment style, unless it's secure attachment, like a lot of the maladaptive behavior is an attempt to get those needs met in a way that we learned maybe growing up that wasn't so effective, right? Or maybe it's a compensatory behavior,
Yeah.
right? That we're trying to overcompensate for something, like you said, maybe with the anxious avoidant, right?
Yeah. So you can see, for example, like anxious preoccupied, a lot of their
Anxious
core
preoccupied,
wounds.
excuse me.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Absolutely.
A lot of their
Yeah.
their wounds and their fears are about like abandonment, being alone, being excluded, being disliked, rejected, unloved. Whereas it's funny because if you see a dismissive avoidant on the other side of the sort of attachment continuum, in a sense, dismissive avoidance, like their core wounds are not around that. They have a core wound of being shamed. There's this deep core wound of feeling like I am defective or something's wrong with me, of being not good enough or incapable, of feeling unsafe at a low level. You'll see a lot of that being in there as well. But you'll see a lot more around feeling trapped or helpless or powerless, or a sense of not belonging. So the wounds are different, right? And when we can understand somebody's attachment style, we're like, oh, we know what wounds we have to reprogram to help you become secure. Also, you'll see with dismissive avoidance, like totally different needs, like you said, right? Than an anxious preoccupied that are unmet. And so we know, okay, you have to plug into meeting these needs for yourself as an adult in order to be able to form secure and healthy relationships. And so by doing all that work, but applying things in a way that's allowing for reprogramming to happen, like that repetition and emotion on a daily basis, we can actually rewire our attachment style in order to become secure.
Wow. I imagine it really helps to know what you're targeting.
So much.
As a
Yeah.
counselor, sometimes I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole, because so many things, whack-a-mole, that old Chuck E. Cheese
Yes.
game where you're trying to hit
Yeah.
it's popping up. And I feel like, counseling, the therapy work sometimes can be that way because life is complicated, life is messy, and so many things creep up, and people, at the same time, you want to be attentive to what's in the room and what people bring to the table. But it sounds really helpful to understand where these maybe deep rooted issues stem from. So you have like an overarching target, right? With the work you're trying to do. Sounds simple, but it's not. And I'm wondering, I know we just kind of touched on it, but it would do me a huge favor, since I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, and anyone listening, if you could just kind of slowly kind of go through the different attachment styles, maybe, and what are some of the specific challenges that we might see with them?
Absolutely. So, there's 4 attachment styles in total for anybody listening who doesn't know. So, our first one is the securely attached style, and our securely attached individuals in childhood. So, our original attachment style forms between the ages of 0 to 2. And that's based on the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And essentially during this period of time, we get a lot of conditioning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we get conditioning to learn about what love is, what relationships are, how to give and receive, what to expect from other individuals, and how to relate to people overall, right? And I often use the analogy that having a different attachment style from somebody is like sitting down trying to play a board game with somebody and you have a different rule book for the board game. Like I have the rule book for Monopoly and you have the rule book for Scrabble, and we try to play the game and it's just chaos, right? Like you can imagine.
Well, that just makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. And that's kind of people with different attachment styles, right? They have a different rule for love, for relationships, for connection, what it's supposed to look and feel like. So we have our securely attached individuals, and securely attached people essentially get a lot of approach-oriented behaviors from their caregivers. So if they cry or express emotion, they'll have caregivers who come towards them, try to figure out what's going on, are present, are attuned, and are fairly consistent. And so as their attachment style, because we do have neuroplasticity, so our attachment style can change. As an example, somebody could be secure and then see their parents go through an awful divorce at 8 years old and become anxious, preoccupied, or something like that. But we'll see that between, these early years of upbringing in a securely attached family, there is presence from the caregiver. There is positive reward for expressing emotion, right? A child cries, the caregiver pays attention, they listen. There's a sense of needs being met. There's a sense of needs being negotiated, right? So like, the example I give in a secure home is like, needs being met doesn't mean that when the child cries at 6 years old and says, but mom, it's 10 p.m. and I want candy. The caregiver.
Thanks for that clarification.
It's not like, oh, here's the candy. It's, hey, honey, I know you want candy. Like, I know that you really want to eat the candy right now. I understand. And, if I give you the candy, you're going to be up all night with a stomach ache. Like, let's get a good sleep. If you eat all of your dinner tomorrow night, you can have a little bit of candy after dinner. So there's this validating of the needs and negotiating of the needs. And so essentially, like, at a very young age, these things are being taught for people in their adult life. A lot of these deep programs are being taken in and imprinted for what relationships look like. And if somebody feels like they can express their emotions and good things happen, they feel safe being vulnerable in relationships. If there's a lot of approach-oriented behaviors when they share themselves, they express their needs, there's a sense of trust being built. If there's a sense of needs being negotiated, then people learn to better communicate as adults and to hold space for each other. If there's a lot of presence and attunement, we actually have an easier time being in our body and having a regulated nervous system as adults. I mean, there's so many different positive aspects that come out of that. And a securely attached person is likely to, obviously, as a result of all those things, have an easier time relating to people, an easier time communicating, has a greater sense of self-confidence and self-worth. And so we'll see that be, one really important aspect. And then we have our 3 insecurely attached styles, right? So that's our 1 secure. Our 3 insecurely attached styles are called the anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful, avoidant, or disorganized. And the anxious attachment style is the one we talked about a moment ago. So they tend to have a lot of inconsistency in childhood. So there can be an actual abandonment that takes place, like a parent leaves the family system and doesn't come back. Or more often than not, it's a lot of sort of micro abandonments. Because when we think about the subconscious, it's the repetition that can also program. So what we'll see in that kind of example is, let's say there's one really present parent and one parent who's really unattuned or avoidant. Then what we'll see is that juxtaposition between the two causes this child to grow up in a feeling of perceived abandonment. Like, oh, one parent's there and the other parent's gone. Or if we have 2 really present parents, but they both work a lot, right? Dynamics like that, okay, they're really here and then it's stripped away, it's taken away. And so it infuses this repetition of this perceived abandonment. And so if we have any kinds of circumstances along those lines where there's a lot of inconsistency, then somebody's likely to grow up and be anxious, preoccupied. And you'll see that because that individual, when those caregivers are close, when they are nearby, they have more positive than negative emotional associations to love, to relationships. A lot of their coping goes towards just maintaining proximity, doing whatever they can to try to get closer to their attachment figure. And something that's really interesting is, as children, once we grow up into adults, we use subconsciously our primary caregiver. It gets actually replaced by our primary attachment figure, who's our romantic relationship as an adult. So whatever's unresolved, whatever's unresolved from childhood will just show up in our adult romantic relationships. So you'll see the anxious, they tend to be the individuals in relationships that are clingy, needy, struggle to be alone, don't like being alone. They can be really lonely. They have a lot of core wounds around that abandonment, exclusion, being disliked, rejected. They tend to be really big people pleasers. And so many of their coping behaviors are to try to just get closer to people. And, unfortunately, the primary casualty in that experience becomes the relationship to themselves. Because if I don't know how to be with myself, sit with myself, reflect on myself, if I don't know myself, I'm going to have a really hard time self-soothing. I'm going to have a really hard time individuating and figuring out who I am, what it is that I want. I'm more likely to have a weaker sense of self-identity. And so you'll see a whole bunch of different painful dynamics that come off of that. Now, on the flip side, anxious, preoccupied people are usually very charming, very sweet, very likable, very kind. I mean, there's so many great qualities, but those are going to be some of the big things that they struggle with in their relationships. And you'll see anxious, preoccupied as adults. They end up being in a situation where they hold on so tight, everything just kind of slips away from them, right? They're often in relationships where people run or jet, and they're like, why is this happening? So that's the anxious, preoccupied. The flip side, the more other sort of extreme end of the continuum, is the dismissive avoidant. And they are pretty much the exact opposite of the anxious,
Stoic.
preoccupied.
Yeah.
And they grew up in a household where there's a lot of neglect. And sometimes it's overt neglect, sometimes it's more covert neglect. And there can also be an element of enmeshment there. So we'll see, for example, that, if somebody grows up in a home where there's no structure, food's not on the table, those sorts of issues, I mean, there's overt neglect. But the vast majority of the time, it's actually this covert, sort of subtle neglect where, there might be food on the table, roof over their heads, stability, but there's this absence of emotional attunement, absence of emotional connection, absence of feeling safe to be vulnerable, maybe getting shamed a lot for emotions. And so what the dismissive avoidant learns in that environment is, okay, well, I can't need emotional connection from somebody, because children come into the world and they're wired for attunement, right? So they're wired for this sense of connection. And then when that's not there, if the caregivers are not present, or they're never really around, or they shame emotions, then we have this aspect of the child that's neglected, and it doesn't feel safe to feel. So this person tries to kind of park their emotions away. And as a result, they often grow up thinking like something's wrong with me, like that, my emotions are defective. It's not okay to have this emotional sense of self. And they shame themselves a lot. And so dismissive avoidants often have these big shame wounds, this chronic sort of subtle feeling of unsafety, because they feel like everybody's out for themselves in the world, and they don't get this sense of safety from interconnection. And they'll tend to really struggle with wanting to commit to certain situations, with wanting to maintain a sense of closeness. And they're often the people as adults who, get the cold feet, run away, don't know why, push people away as soon as things are getting serious or close. And often there's this sort of adaptation to being alone, that it just feels safer for them. Because as children, if they needed closeness emotionally and it kept getting rejected, they have more negative emotional associations to needing closeness than they do.
That's what I was just thinking. I was painting this picture in my head, and I was thinking, so what would this look like? This would look like somebody who is trying to find a way to survive in this environment when that need's not met. And so it's a survival mechanism, but also could be a form of acceptance, right? If they were shamed for showing emotion, but praised for being stoic or independent.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Then those things would solidify. And that would just be their way of doing life, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, we have to remember that when those individuals are adults, like I think they sometimes get a hard time from, other attachment styles, but like exactly what you said so beautifully is it's a survival mechanism. Like, it was hard for them, as children to experience that. And that's how they coped. And so, when we try to ask for commitment or closeness, we have to also be aware that they have to work through unraveling and reconditioning years of what makes them feel safe, right? Like to be able to create that space made them feel like, okay, this is where I do get the praise, or I do survive or adapt and feel relief. And so to go against all of their own programming is often a difficult thing for them. And then last but not least, we have the fearful avoidant. The fearful avoidant is like the hot and cold partner. They are the come here, get close to me. And then you get close and they're like, nope, go away, step back.
And probably not great for the anxious preoccupied.
Exactly. Exactly. And they can, be a little tricky for sure, but fearful avoidants often grow up in like a more chaotic environment, and where our anxious attachments, sort of coping mechanism for their environment is to maintain proximity. And the dismissive avoidance coping mechanism is to diminish their attachment needs to feel relief. The fearful avoidant doesn't really have either. So what you'll see, and sort of like one example that I think illustrates a typical sort of fearful avoidant environment, although there can be many variations of this, is let's say, for example, that a parent is an alcoholic, right? So let's say that one day the fearful avoidant child comes home and their parents drinking and they're in a great mood and they're extra
Mhm.
loving and extra kind. And so that day, love is good, love is kind. And then another day, their parents had too much to drink and they're in a really bad mood and they're being cruel and kind of vicious.
Mm.
Well, that day when the parents drinking, it's chaotic, it's painful, it's really sad. Love is equating to pain. And then another day, the parents getting sober and they're really apologetic and they're really kind again. And so now love is good. And then another day, the parents getting sober, but they're just going through a really bad hangover and they're really grumpy and irritable. So there's no way for the fearful avoidant child to create an attachment strategy. There's no consistency. The DA is like, okay, I know I'm getting neglected. Let me pull away. The AP is like, when love is close, love is good. Let me keep trying to get closer. The FA is like, I have no idea what's going on. There's no
Mhm.
predictability. And so you'll hear the other term for fearful avoidance sometimes referred to as disorganized, because they have a disorganized attachment strategy. And essentially what their
Mm.
attachment strategy becomes is hypervigilance, learning to become really effective at reading between the lines. Because if you grow up in constant chaos and you're always walking on eggshells and you don't know when the other shoe is going to drop, then, okay, let me just read between the lines all day. And that's my attachment strategy.
Mm.
And because there's a lot of chaos, there tends to be a lot of core wounds, a lot around trust, unsafety, still a lot of the anxious side. They have a lot of the abandonment wounds that the anxious has, and a lot of the trapped and helpless and powerless core wounds the dismissive avoidant has. And so they tend to sort of have the core wounds of both and the unmet needs of both, but they tend to also really struggle primarily to trust, to be able to settle into relationships. And they tend to have, this sort of idea that love equals something I yearn for, but love also equals pain. And there's sort of competing emotional associations to the same thing, being love, being relationships, half of which are really good, half of which are really painful. And so it creates a lot of confusion for this individual within themselves. And often you'll see fearful avoidance can be very good at like connecting with people and getting close with people, but then as soon as things get real and they actually form an attachment bond, they constantly pinball back and forth between, within their own mind and their own experience. And I was a fearful avoidant, and I can really, I would get into serious relationships before I did a lot of this subconscious reprogramming work, and on like a daily basis I would be like, should I stay or should I leave? Just every day throughout the whole relationship for
Mm.
years, should I stay or should I go? And it was because I couldn't understand at the time that on one side, I really wanted love, really wanted connection, really valued it. On the other side, it just terrified me. And so as soon as there was too much closeness, there was just this concept of like, this is going to really hurt me long term. So why am I getting close? Like, the closer I get, the more painful it's going to be one day. And so, this constant push pull dynamic within the person, which obviously translates to a lot of push pull dynamic and essentially intermittent reinforcement in relationships. So that's sort of the
Wow.
summary of the different attachment styles.
That's so eloquently put, I mean, the way you just are able to relay all of this complex information, because these are the levers, right, of personal development. If we understand what we're trying to address, how we got here, right, then there's hope for change.
Yes,
But that makes
exactly.
so much sense. And thank you for taking the time to put that together for me.
Thank you.
I'm definitely going to spend a lot of time reflecting on that, because I really want to understand this attachment stuff too. I've had some of it, in my training, but definitely haven't spent enough time on understanding how to really leverage that understanding for change.
Yeah.
Because it's deep work, and it. I'm assuming that it's possible,
Very
but
possible.
to
Yes.
change, right? To change and work on our attachment styles. Could you talk a little bit about that? If it is, and how does one actually go about moving from one of these three skewed attachment styles to something more secure?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of like piece I like to start off with people is, well, you are not born with an attachment style, right? You formed your attachment style
Hmm.
between 0 to 2. So what happened is you had a whole bunch of patterns that got conditioned into your subconscious through repetition and emotion. And so knowing that that's what happened to us, we can use those same mechanisms to recondition them. And the things that we have to recondition are exactly what we've been talking about. Is like if we can know what core wounds we adapted. So, for me, I had a huge trust wound. I kept waiting, the trust wounds would show up, and I didn't know how to really let my guard down. And so that was something I really had to work on and recondition within the relationship to myself, using tools like auto suggestion, that belief reprogramming we talked about,
Hmm.
but also using, the funny part is like all of our wounds are essentially also our shadow. So the things that
Hmm.
we are wounded by, we also do to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So, for me, I had these big trust wounds, but then I also constantly betrayed my own trust because I would people please people so much and never set my own boundaries or put my needs last or say yes when it was a no for me, or, so I'm violating my own trust all the time. So that kind of comes into our needs, right?
Hmm.
We reprogram the wounds. We learn to meet our unmet needs. We develop healthier boundaries. We learn to regulate our nervous system. Like, these sound like a lot of big topics, but they're not that hard. Like, once you understand the reprogramming of the core wounds, you can plug in a couple at a time over a few weeks, do a huge number on them, move on to next wounds. Learning to meet our needs is like really identifying what were these unmet needs from childhood. If it was safety, if it was a sense of connection, a sense of harmony, like what, attunement, presence, how can we do those things in relationship to self?
Hmm.
And then, once we fix that within ourselves, once we heal that and reprogram those patterns across core wounds, needs, emotional patterns, then we have to go bring that into the world. So sometimes I'll see people, and this is my experience too, like, becoming secure for me was, at first I felt secure on my own. I reprogrammed a ton of core wounds. I learned to meet my own needs. I learned to emotionally regulate. And I was like, it was the first time I ever felt a sense of peace in my life. And then I was like, well, why would I want to be in a relationship? Because I'm good on my
Right.
own and happy.
Right. You just got it figured out. Don't mess with it.
Don't anything mess it up. Exactly. And so, the sort of second layer of it becomes, well, how can we maintain that well in relationship to others? How can we learn to communicate about our needs or set a boundary or, change the way that we cope? And so when we can do that work and we can communicate and articulate what it is that we need in a relationship when we're triggered, or let somebody, understand what's going on for us, practice that vulnerability, those boundaries, when we can do that with people, that's where we really have that's what will lead to becoming securely attached. So, it's work that can be absolutely done. I mean, even in our school, and this is dominantly securely attached. So this is more than 50% when people come in, they test on the attachment style, and the stat was 92% of our students within 90 days reported being dominantly securely attached by targeting these 6 areas.
Wow.
Now that's dominantly, it doesn't mean they're 100% secure. But like huge dents in these things by really, really digging into like the core wound reprogramming, the needs, the emotional regulation, and then just bringing that out to communicate to others. So something that can absolutely be done. I'm blessed to get to see it all the time. And I think it's important to realize that if we have proper tools to understand our experiences and then to work through them, all these things can absolutely be changed.
So that begs the question. So you say that we can identify our own attachment style. How do we go about that? Like, how do we figure out where we're at so we can move forward?
Yes, it's a great question. So there's different tools. Like, one of the things we have is we have people take an attachment style test, and there's actually questions that are scientifically backed to demonstrate what somebody's attachment style is, and it breaks it down by percentage. But I mean, what I find the most often is that people, as a general rule, will know because they'll resonate with one of those,
Hmm.
4 attachment styles as we break it down, and it's
Yeah.
quite obvious for people. I will say that sometimes people may have moments of like thinking that they're more, when I worked with clients, sometimes I'd see a dismissive avoidant come in, for example, and be like, I'm probably secure,
Hmm.
because they are not chaotic, right? Dismissive avoidants
Right.
are like, they're more to themselves, and so they don't think, oh, I'm not on this like roller coaster all the time. I'm probably the secure one. And sometimes when we self-report or self-identify, until we understand and really observe a little more, sometimes we can think we're a little more secure than we are. Or sometimes I'd see people be like, oh, I'm just a little bit anxious. I have sort of like a little bit of anxious attachment style. But then as I get to know them and get to know their patterns, I'm like, oh, you're pretty anxious. There's a lot in there.
Right.
And so, there can definitely be elements of that, but really what it's going to boil down to is like knowing what your core wounds are, right? Which of those core wounds do you identify with the most? Is it the abandonment? Is it the trapped wounds? Like those are pretty obvious. What are your biggest unmet needs from childhood? Was it a sense of having the ability to be vulnerable, express yourself emotionally, be attuned? If that was all missing, you're more likely to be in the DA kind of category. Or if the big, theme of childhood was the inconsistencies, then you may be more in that sort of a anxious attachment, abandonment kind of category. Or if it was all chaos, then that's probably going to put you in the fearful avoidance space. So it's really understanding like those childhood patterns, the core wounds that are there. And then obviously a really big one is how you cope, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
just constantly withdraw when you need to cope and constantly sort of avoid everybody and you have all these avoidance mechanisms? Do you constantly cling and find yourself really like having a hard time not trying to fix things immediately or take any time on your own? Or are you the person that's hot and cold? You go back and forth depending on the day. Sometimes you cling, sometimes you totally avoid, and you can see those like sort of juxtaposed polarities there in your experience. So it really boils down to like recognizing those core behaviors. But there's also, we have a free attachment style test online, but then there's tons of them online too. So definitely something that people can look into.
Wow, and this is really great. So, and as you were talking earlier, I'm thinking maybe historically I was a anxious preoccupied because I'm the people pleaser. I'm the guy who has trouble saying no. I'll overcommit, and then oftentimes will put myself last, and then sometimes get resent. In the past, I've been ended up very resentful about that, and it's actually blown up my relationships because of it. Or I've had conflicting goals, and then boundaries get enmeshed, and that's been my experience in the past. And but it sounds like we can kind of focus on where the wounds come from, as well as how we're coping, right? We're trying to get our needs met when we're triggered, right? And then that'll give us maybe a matrix and just kind of hone in. But it sounds a lot easier to use your test, your quiz,
But
um,
everybody can sort of see
right?
generally as
Right.
well. And it's interesting because the behaviors are still always based on the wounds, right? Like if we wouldn't put ourselves last if we weren't afraid of not being good enough or being
Mm-hmm.
abandoned or being disliked or being rejected. So it's like by working on the wounds first and then trying to work on the behaviors, it's much easier because usually the wounds are actually sponsoring the way that we behave.
I like the way you phrase that. They're sponsoring the way we behave. I love it. I love it. How long does it take for one to complete your quiz?
Oh, the quiz is really quick. I mean, it's like 5 to 10 minutes maximum.
This is it, right?
Yep, that's it.
5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Should we do it live?
If you want to, yeah.
Sure, let's do
We
it.
can
You guys want to see me do it live? We can do it live real quick. I got 5 minutes. Let's see. Start quiz. We're gonna find out what's my attachment style. Let's see. Let's see.
Where
Are
are you
you on?
going?
Yes. Oops. Let me go back. Can I go back? I can't
I
go
think
back.
you can just no, sorry.
I can't go back. Oh no.
You can refresh the page and it will start from the beginning.
Okay. I'll try this again. All right. All right. Just so y'all know, you can refresh it. All right. Yes. There we go. In case my wife is watching, I'm
Very
just
happy.
kidding. Let's see. I'm very happy.
Can
Yes.
be very emotionally present.
I would like to think I'm secure now. I've done a lot of work on myself.
I
All
bet. And
right.
generally, people who stay in long-term relationships are dominantly secure, right? Like if that's not there, it's a lot trickier.
Yeah, right? Thank you for the disclaimer. All right. I feel naturally comfortable and safe expressing my feelings and needs to be loved. I would say yeah. I feel very upset when others infringe on my need. No, I'm pretty even, Steven. I am willing to work through challenges in relationships before suddenly trying to. Yes, definitely. I tend to be out of touch with my emotions. Quite no, not anymore. I am very attuned to others' needs and often put them. Used to.
I mean, you can answer honestly. Like if it was used to, then it's used to. It's a false.
Right, right,
But
okay.
but I think
No, I don't
where you
resent. If I do it now, I do it consciously.
that's yeah.
I'm not going to resent it. Um, I know what I'm getting myself into. Let's see. I would say yeah. I'm very melancholy.
Yeah, yeah.
Effective at compromising. Yeah. It's very difficult for me to set boundaries unless I am angry. I can sometimes set excessive boundaries and push people away too dramatically. No. If I notice my partner showing any signs of coldness, I panic and want to get closer as quickly as possible. This often happens to me in friendships as well. Yes, actually.
Interesting.
It is not uncommon for me to experience inward emotional turbulence throughout the duration of my romantic relationship. This applies. No.
That's the
I
fearful
often
one.
feel very hot or cold towards my partner or family members. No. I know that I'm worthy of healthy relationships. Yes. Now I do. Why do you want to learn about attachment theory? To understand myself better. When I feel hurt by a loved one, I often have a strong fight or flight response, find myself wanting to push the person as far away as possible. No. I do not feel as though I need anything from my romantic partner or loved ones. It can be difficult to conceptualize how others would meet a lot of my... That's a good one. Ah, crafty. All
There's some
right.
sneaky ones in
I
here.
will say I will own it. I have a hard time asking for anything from other people.
Yeah.
I own it. I know it's a problem. I'm working on it, everybody. All right, I'll say yes. I do not enjoy being out of romantic. Wow. I don't fear being alone. I just haven't been alone in a very long time.
That's okay. That's like a
I
you're in a
like being in
healthy
relationships, so
if you're in a
I'll
healthy
say
marriage,
false.
then
Yeah.
yeah, that's yeah.
If a loved one's behavior hurts me, I will express my feelings and try to understand what caused them to act that way. Another tricky one. I'm passive, and I'm still working on this one. I tend to
Interesting.
let things go even if it bothers me. So,
And then they usually build up in the background sometimes.
yep, if a loved one's behavior hurts me. Yeah. I hunger for closeness, but I fear the emotional difficulty of it being at the same time. No.
Yeah, that's probably not you.
Yeah.
The fearful avoidant is that one. That was me.
Gotcha.
That was like, I want the closeness, but I'm scared of it. Like these kind of like push
Right, because
pull
it's hard to
inner.
trust. Yeah, if you grew up that
Yeah,
way, it'd be hard to trust that the person's going to follow through or not turn coat on you, right?
exactly.
I do not like making social plans with others in advance. I often fear being trapped by commitments with other people. No. I find that setting boundaries comes naturally to me. No. Historically, I struggled with them. So,
Yeah.
something I worked very hard on.
That was my struggle too.
I focus much more on the relationship in my life than I do on myself. Used to be the case. I'll say false now. I often feel protective over my space, privacy, and belongings. No.
You're probably very generous
Except my
and very
expensive
good
Mac,
at sharing.
Let's see. I generally feel invaded when my partner or loved one demands too much. No way. I'm melancholy. I would prefer to spend most of my free time with my partner if I were to be in a romantic relationship. It would be hard for me to want. Yes. I'm the joint at the hip guy. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yes. I feel that it is easy to be vulnerable with my romantic partner. I would say for the most part. I find that my partner or loved ones usually emotionally recover from conflict before I do. True. That's a curious one. You got some twists in here.
There's some
I was
interesting
expecting,
reasons.
yeah, right? I deeply fear being abandoned by my partner or love interests.
I would say if it was true in the past, but it's
Yeah.
pretty categorically false now, then it's false.
Yeah.
It could be that you relate to those old aspects of yourself, but if it doesn't come up as a fear on a daily basis, then it's not a fear
Gotcha.
currently.
Thank you. Gotcha. How much do you know about attachment theory? Well, I know a lot more now than I used to. All right. We'll say I know a little bit. How old are you? I am, oh my gosh. Yes, I'm
Sorry.
41 now. What is your gender? Male. All right.
Sorry, you have to put your
Cool.
email in for the results, but it
Oh,
doesn't,
that's it. I'm doing it.
it's free. Yeah.
Everybody knows my name. Everybody knows who I am.
You
There we
can put
go.
in like a fake email
Oh
too,
no.
but it gives you a whole
Everybody knows
report.
my email too.
Okay, I was wondering if you don't want to put your
That's
email
all good.
online.
All right. I can't wait to see the results. Oh, and you even have a little cool.
Yeah.
You just, yeah. I'm not surprised anymore. You have videos
Yeah.
everywhere. You put out videos every day. Every
Daily
day.
videos. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
just,
For I think 3 years now,
that is
probably.
insane. I mean, you're not insane. I just mean that's an insane amount of work.
I like to
But it's
chat,
quality,
and
right?
so I just sit down and kind of do them spur of the moment and rifle them out, and it's not so bad.
Oh, I have a secure tag. Woohoo! All right. I made it.
You could tell. Yeah.
I made it, everybody.
Congratulations.
I'm going to frame this on the wall. All right. And for anyone who obviously wants to know more about the wonderful work you're doing, you have a great website here, Personal Development School. You have created a wonderful, wonderful database of just a plethora of courses. Like, oh my gosh, like, let me just take a look here. You have so many courses. I'm like, I don't even know where you find time to make them all.
Courses.
But you have just countless courses here. From what I recall, they're in the 119-ish range per course, but you also have like a monthly plan, all access pass, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
And the monthly
all you
plan
can
comes
eat for $67 a month,
pretty much the
right?
buffet style. But
Right?
we do a lot of cool stuff on that one. So I do a webinar with our students 4 times a week. And then it's like an hour and a half long, and we just go through like Q&A, or we pick like topics that people are
What?
posing.
You have
Yeah, and then we
it's
train
crazy.
facilitators. So we have other coaches and counselors in there who also do it. So there's actually a daily webinar. You
What?
can come in. There's a daily webinar between myself and other trained individuals in there, and then we have these social events too, where you can practice with people, like practice communicating, practice learning your needs and sharing them with others. And so we
You
have
do role play.
Yes, exactly. So sort of
What?
like support groups in there. So we have like in total 2 to 3 events per day, except for Sundays. And you can come in, you can practice, you can kind of do all this stuff. And it's nice because you get people together and they build friendships and relationships. And it's honestly really nice to see.
Wow. So you've created a whole community. You have
Yeah.
live interaction daily, which is insane. Most memberships have like maybe a monthly Q&A kind of
Yeah, we
thing.
really
Like,
ramp it up in there.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a steal, y'all.
Thank you.
That is
Thank
so cool. Wow. Again, I'm just dumbfounded by the work you're doing. I could pick your brain for hours. All
you.
right. Wonderful, wonderful. Not to mention your YouTube channel is blown up. You must have a silver play button somewhere laying
You know
around. I'm
what?
surprised it's not in your background.
I went down south and they mailed it to me and it got lost in the mail somewhere.
What?
Never
No, well,
followed
no,
up.
no, no, no.
I
You
have to
gotta
go
frame
find
that
where it
baby.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
207,000 subscribers and growing fast because I believe when we scheduled this, you were like at 170. So yours, it's just blowing up. And it's
Awesome.
no surprise why. You just have so much gold in your YouTube channel here in the videos you put out and your shorts and everything. So
Thank
just
you.
keep up the great work. You're doing a wonderful service to the community. I can't tell you what a need this is, especially in the clients I'm dealing with. The relationship stuff, that's at the core of everything.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that affects your quality of life on so many fronts. So absolutely wonderful. If you're watching this, subscribe to her YouTube channel. You won't regret it. Got a lot going on your Instagram as well, right?
Yeah.
52,000 followers there. Same thing. You can be found pretty much everywhere at the Personal Development School. It sounds like it's
Yes.
pretty consistent. Same with your Facebook, right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
TikTok. Oh, that's different. That's Thais Gibson. That's your name on TikTok, right?
Yep.
Okay. And LinkedIn, Personal Development School. All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Of course. Yeah, for sure. Just want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you and the wonderful work you're doing. So thank you for that. This has just been a wealth of information. If anybody is left in the chat and wants to throw out a question or two, now is your chance. Otherwise, you'll have to hunt her down later. But as busy
Awesome.
as you are, I'm sure you're hard to get a hold of.
I've really enjoyed being here with you, and thank you for all the kind words. And this was a really, really nice discussion.
This was great. Yeah, thank you so much for making time, and I hope you have a great week. And the invitation's always open. You're always welcome back on. You can be our resident expert on attachment styles.
Thank
Just let
you.
me
I
know.
would love to be. I would love
Yeah,
that. Absolutely.
by all means.
Thank you. And you're doing beautiful work in the world too.
Ah,
So thank you
thank
for
you.
what
I'm
you're doing.
trying. Um, do hang out for a couple minutes after so they can finish downloading your audio, videos, and backup. And if you don't mind, and we'll be good. With that, everyone have a great week. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the Mental Health Toolbox YouTube channel and podcast. That way you don't miss out on any excellent live interviews like this. I'm sure a lot of you will be a little sad that you missed this one. So don't miss it next time. Subscribe to the email list. You can go to the website, mentalhealthtoolbox.com, sign up to the newsletter there, or hit the link in the description. And then I always shoot out an email at least 24 hours before these lives. So that way you won't miss. Okay? All right. With that, everyone, have a fantastic week. And there we go.
Nice.